Have you ever felt like you were running on empty, as though life's challenges were stacking up faster than you could handle? I've been there too, and I know that sense of looking around, wondering if there's anyone or anything that can give you the courage to keep pushing forward. Today, I want to share a powerful reflection on what it means to find genuine strength and resilience, inspired by the life and teachings of Jesus. This won't be just a quick fix or a surface-level pep talk. Instead, we'll dive deep into ancient wisdom and pair it with some fresh insights that speak to our modern-day battles. We'll unpack 6 core lessons that Jesus himself modeled, lessons about trusting in a higher power, praying with your whole heart, lifting others through acts of service, building unshakable faith in dark times, choosing to forgive even when it's hard, and accepting a plan bigger than our own. But I want to do more than just quote scripture. Throughout this journey, I'll share stories, personal reflections, and a few practical tips you can apply right away. My hope is that by the end, you'll not only feel encouraged, but also equipped, like you've got actual tools in your pocket for whenever the storms roll in. And let's be honest, storms always do. Maybe your storm is a financial crisis that seems to have no exit. Maybe it's your health or a family conflict that breaks your heart every single day. Or perhaps it's just that feeling of burnout and emptiness you can't quite put into words. Whatever your situation, remember, you're not alone. People from every walk of life have discovered that faith, prayer, and genuine love in action can transform even the darkest moments into an opportunity for growth. So if you're ready, let's explore how Jesus lived and taught a path of resilience, and how we can follow that blueprint in our own unique, messy, 21st century lives. I invite you to stay with me until the end, because together we're going to explore how these timeless principles can not only help us endure life's greatest hits, but actually emerge stronger, more peaceful, and more hopeful on the other side. His full trust in God. It wasn't a vague, half-hearted belief. It was a deep conviction that every step he took was under divine care. Think about his time in the wilderness, where he faced genuine hunger and temptation. The devil practically beckoned him to turn stones into bread. We might see that and think, well, if you're hungry and you can solve the problem, why not just do it? But Jesus chose a different route. He insisted that genuine sustenance is more than physical, it's spiritual. By saying, man does not live on bread alone, he underscored a key reality. Sometimes the greatest tests of our lives demand total dependence on God rather than quick fixes. That's exactly what many of us face today. We're tempted to rely on our own hustle, our own logic, and our own strength. Maybe it's working extra hours at the expense of our family or trying to force solutions that just don't fit. Jesus teaches us that real power comes not from controlling every variable, but from surrendering our struggles to God. This doesn't mean we become passive. In fact, placing trust in God can motivate us to act in faith more boldly. David, the shepherd boy who faced Goliath, famously declared that victory belonged to the Lord. He picked up that slingshot, but his heart was aligned with a power much greater than his own. When we trust that God is in control, we free ourselves from the crippling anxiety of having to mastermind every outcome. Maybe you're facing a giant of your own, a massive debt, a health scare, or a betrayal that cut you to the core. The story of Jesus in the wilderness and David against Goliath remind us that faith doesn't dismiss the reality of the battle. It simply assures us we're not fighting alone. Even today, I've seen modern testimonies of individuals who prayed for guidance and then took a leap of faith. Whether that meant changing careers, moving to a new city, or stepping back from a toxic situation. Trust doesn't come with a blueprint for every moment, but it does supply the courage to keep going, believing that God will provide precisely what is needed at precisely the right time. That keeps us connected. Jesus modeled constant prayer, stepping away from the crowds to find solitude and converse with God. In that intimate space, he wrestled with deep emotion, as seen most vividly in Gethsemane, where his sweat fell like drops of blood. At the same time, he also showed us that prayer can happen anywhere, on a mountainside, in a locked room, or even within our own quiet thoughts as we go about our day. What many of us struggle with, though, is consistency. It's easy to pray in a moment of crisis, or when we're feeling guilty that we haven't prayed in a while. But Jesus prayed incessantly, not just during emergencies. This continuous connection is what truly keeps us grounded. Think of prayer as an ongoing conversation with a trusted friend. You share your joys, your anxieties, your gratitude, and your heartbreak. In doing so, you create space to receive comfort, clarity, and direction. I remember talking to a former co-worker who had just lost her job and found herself in a swirl of disappointment and uncertainty. She decided to set aside a few minutes each morning to journal her prayers, turning her pain into honest words before God. Over time, she noticed her perspective shifting. While her situation didn't magically resolve overnight, she felt a quiet confidence welling up, guiding her to the right connections and opportunities. That's the beautiful power of prayer. It builds resilience from the inside out. Jesus himself, before choosing the 12 disciples, spent the entire night in prayer. It's a stark reminder that big decisions often demand that extra measure of reflection and surrender. By praying constantly, we remind ourselves that we're not the final authority on our own lives. We open the door to a divine perspective that sees far beyond our limited viewpoints. It's in those moments of prayer, whether they're raw and tear-filled or a simple breath of gratitude, that we're infused with a strength capable of shifting both our internal state and our external circumstances. But for Jesus, serving others was a profound act of spiritual power. Think of that moment in the upper room when he knelt down and washed his disciples' feet. In an era where foot washing was seen as a lowly, servant-like task, Jesus flipped the script. He demonstrated that lifting others up doesn't diminish our own worth. Instead, it reveals the depth of our love and confidence in God's ways. Sometimes the best remedy for our own stress or despair is to look beyond ourselves. In volunteer circles, there's a saying, "When you help others climb a hill, you get closer to the top yourself." That might sound cliché, but there's real wisdom there. You could be grappling with loneliness, and then you decide to mentor a teen who's struggling with self-esteem issues. You begin to see how your guidance, your shared stories, or even your simple presence can light up that young person's life. In doing so, you find renewed purpose and realize you're less alone than you thought. Jesus feeding the crowd of 5,000 is another classic example of how service leads to miracles. He could have said, "We don't have enough resources, send them home." Instead, he took the little they had, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and used it for an extravagant blessing. This demonstration reminds us that even when we feel like our resources, time, money, emotional energy, are in short supply, choosing to serve can unlock unexpected solutions. Personally, I've seen countless scenarios where simple acts of generosity sparked a chain reaction. A family shares extra produce from their garden with neighbors, and soon a sense of community grows, with neighbors supporting one another in ways that go far beyond food. When we adopt a servant's heart, we align ourselves with the compassionate purpose Jesus championed. It's in those moments of caring for the least of these that we discover an inner resilience that nourishes not just us, but everyone around us. It sounds like a comforting catchphrase, but for Jesus, it was always tangible and deeply transformative. Remember the time he calmed the storm on the Sea of Galilee? His disciples were terrified, convinced they were about to sink. Jesus awoke from his sleep and questioned their fear, calling out their little faith. Then, With the power of his word, the storm subsided. That kind of faith might seem far removed from our everyday experiences, but let's look closer. In today's world, our storms might come in the form of unexpected medical bills, relationship breakdowns, or that dreaded phone call in the middle of the night. We often feel like the waves are just too high, the wind too forceful. Yet, if there's anything we learn from Jesus' example, it's that faith shifts our focus away from the chaos onto the one who can still the waters. Faith doesn't deny that problems exist. It simply refuses to let those problems have the final say. Think of the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. She'd tried every treatment, spent all her money, and was likely shunned by her community. In a last act of desperation, she pressed through the crowd just to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. That's what faith in a dark time often looks like, a determination to reach out despite the odds. That moment of trust changed her life instantly. I've met people who fought long battles with illness, addiction, or personal loss. Their testimonies aren't sugar-coated. They don't pretend it's easy. But over and over, I hear them talk about how their faith gave them a peace that circumstances couldn't shake. Their external reality might not have improved immediately, but internally they found a wellspring of hope. That hope carried them until the outward circumstances caught up with the deep conviction they held inside. And that's the challenge for us all, to cultivate a faith that persists when everything screams that we should give up. To believe that God can redeem even the most desperate situations, often in ways we could never script ourselves. The hardest things we'll ever do, there's no glossing over that reality, but it's also one of the most liberating. Jesus taught forgiveness not as a mere moral rule, but as a pathway to real spiritual freedom. From the cross, in unimaginable pain, he uttered the words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That's the level of mercy we're called to mirror. Most of us, of course, won't face crucifixion, but we still encounter betrayal and hurt that can leave deep scars. Maybe it's a friend who spread rumors that damaged your reputation. Maybe it's a family member who walked away when you needed them most. Or maybe it's that coworker who took credit for your hard work. Holding on to that anger can be strangely addictive. We replay the scene in our minds, fueling the fire of resentment. Yet, harboring resentment never punishes the offender as much as it punishes us. It becomes a weight on our minds and hearts, affecting our capacity to trust and love again. Jesus' teaching points to forgiveness as a step that frees both sides. When we release the grip of bitterness, we open ourselves up to healing, peace, and even the possibility of reconciliation. In some cases, forgiveness might not lead to a restored relationship. Boundaries can still be important, but it does set our hearts free. It prevents the cycle of hurt from poisoning our future. I've known people who held on to anger toward an absent parent for decades. Over time, that anger seeped into their other relationships, sabotaging their happiness in subtle but profound ways. Once they embraced forgiveness, often with the help of prayer, counseling, or spiritual community, they found they could breathe easier. Life's colors seemed brighter, and the emotional burden they'd been dragging around was finally gone. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it's rarely easy. But every step we take toward forgiving someone is a step toward breaking the chains that weigh us down. As Jesus explained, if we cling to grudges, we ourselves can't fully receive the forgiveness and healing God wants to give us. Passive to some ears, like giving up your own dreams. But if we look closely at Jesus' own journey, it's actually an act of incredible courage. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as he prepared to face unimaginable suffering, Jesus prayed that the cup of suffering might pass from him. Yet he surrendered, saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." That's hardly passive. It's a bold statement that no matter how dark the path, If it's God's path for us, we'll trust that there's a greater good in store. So often our plans clash with reality. You might have imagined a certain career path, only to find the door slammed shut. You could be counting on a particular relationship to last forever, and it fractures unexpectedly. Accepting God's will doesn't mean we deny the pain or frustration of disappointment. It means believing that if a door closes, maybe there's another we're meant to walk through. It's trusting that sometimes the reason we can't see the solution is that there's a bigger tapestry being woven, one that isn't fully visible from our vantage point. In my own life, there have been times when everything seemed to go the opposite of what I'd planned. I tried to force outcomes that weren't meant to be, only to crash into dead ends. But looking back, I can see how those closed doors forced me to grow, adapt, and even discover new talents or passions I never knew existed. By letting go of the illusion that I controlled every outcome, I found renewed faith that the ultimate plan, God's plan, surpassed my limited vision. Acceptance doesn't mean complacency. In fact, it can energize us to act with greater intention and clarity. Once we've prayed and discerned what we sense to be God's leading, we move forward with confidence. And if obstacles arise, we adapt, trusting that nothing is wasted in God's hands. This posture of acceptance is a wellspring of resilience, because when we trust that every experience, good or bad, carries potential growth and purpose, we're far less likely to collapse in defeat when things go wrong. The unwavering trust in God's care, the daily discipline of prayer, the humility and strength found in serving others, the rock-solid faith that anchors us in life's hardest storms, the freedom that comes with forgiveness, and the transformative act of accepting a will greater than our own. But we're not done yet. It's one thing to acknowledge these lessons. It's another thing to integrate them into the messy realities of our daily lives. Here's where practical application comes into play. If you want to see real change, pick one of these principles and commit to living it out this week. Perhaps you start each morning with a quick prayer, asking God to help you trust more deeply and worry less about your circumstances. Maybe you find a volunteer opportunity or a neighbor you can help in a small way. Or you might choose to reach out to someone you've held a grudge against, even if it's just to say, "I forgive you" in my heart, whether or not they're ready to hear it. For those who feel overwhelmed, think of these practices as small seeds. You don't plant a seed and get fruit the next morning. You water it, nurture it, and over time, it grows. Jesus' teaching is like that, a living, organic process that reshapes us from the inside out. Over time, you'll notice shifts. Maybe you're less anxious or more compassionate, or finding unexpected solutions to problems that once seemed insurmountable. And if you ever stumble or feel discouraged, remember how the disciples themselves often faltered. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, but later became a pillar of the early church. This journey isn't about perfection, it's about perseverance. Keep showing up, keep trusting, keep forgiving, and keep putting others before yourself. It really illustrates what these principles look like in a modern context. A friend of mine faced a career collapse in his early 40s. Laid off unexpectedly, he felt betrayed, embarrassed, and terrified about the future. At first, he tried to manage everything on his own, spending nights scouring job listings, using savings he'd hoped to keep for emergencies, and growing bitter toward those he felt had let him down. Then, in the midst of that chaos, he remembered the biblical stories about trust and prayer. He decided to carve out time each morning, just 15 minutes, to talk to God, journal, and let go of the mounting anxiety. Almost as a side effect of that prayer life, he started to see new openings. He began serving at a local shelter in the afternoons, realizing that while he was unemployed, he might as well do some good. That act of service lit a spark in him, and he eventually teamed up with others who shared similar passions, which led to a new job opportunity. Along the way, he reconnected with an old colleague he'd once been at odds with, and they reconciled. It was messy and unexpected, but also transformative. He told me later that none of it would have happened if he hadn't first surrendered his pride, prayed for guidance, and actively forgiven those he blamed for his predicament. By accepting that God might have a different path for him, he found the inner strength to pivot. In the end, he landed in a career he loves, with a perspective that's more compassionate and big-hearted than ever. That's the extraordinary power of these spiritual truths, not as abstract doctrines, but as real-life changes you can implement today. Thank you for spending this time with me, exploring what it means to draw resilience and inner strength from the teachings of Jesus. If you found these insights meaningful, I invite you to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss any upcoming reflections or discussions. And if you know someone who's going through a tough time, maybe a friend, family member, or co-worker, share this video with them. Sometimes all it takes is a few words of encouragement to make a huge difference. Let's keep spreading hope and light together. Every one of us faces storms, and we all wrestle with doubt, fear, or hurt at some point. But these 6 secrets, trust in God, constant prayer, serving others, faith during trials, wholehearted forgiveness, and surrender to God's will, can carry us through even the fiercest adversity. They're not just theories from a book written centuries ago. They're living principles that can transform our outlook and our future. May you step into this week with renewed courage, remembering that no challenge is too great for the God who calls you to hope, joy, and love. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.